Cool. Okay. So last time we went through this together, we were taking a look at CSS and how we can do some styling with our code. And in this session, what we'll be looking at are some concepts of lists inside of HTML. I'll take a look at the case study here with these microgrid possibilities, so we'll take a look at that together. And essentially just kind of getting figures and organizational elements to work within our visual code. So another one that you might have seen, Project Tree shows it, and so does Capstone Project Part 2 and Project 2 as well. We talk a bit about introducing images into our code. Images are pretty straightforward to put in there, but they can get a little complicated with the styling that goes on with them. So we'll cover that as well. So to get started, what I'll do for us is I'll create a new HTML file and put it into our code. But if you already have this kind of set up on your end, if you could go ahead and just create a new, I'll go ahead and just call this a weekly material on my end. And what I'll do here, so let's microgrid, this one. I'm going to go ahead and copy over the CSS practice styles and practice that we did from last week, like so. And I'll also I'll put them in our chat here for us. So if you don't have these, or you're on a different computer or anything, you could just download them from here. Cool. And again, we covered quite a bit last week with these different concepts of styling, but in general, the idea here is that you can have an external style sheet, and based on all the elements that we determine with these, you can apply different styles for them. So what I want to do is shift away from CSS for the time being, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate my practice file. I'm going to call this new one list practice, and I'll edit this one with my Visual Studio Code. What I'll do here is I'm just going to kind of delete pretty much everything that we did, delete all our good work here, and kind of just start fresh with a new page. So we'll see here that I just am starting off with a general doc type, my header, and my body, and my HTML. Cool. So again, if we actually run our list practice code, we'll notice that nothing really interesting happens. It's blank. And so what we can try to do is take a look at these concepts of lists and everything that work with us. So there's two types of lists that you're going to be working with in Python, or excuse me, not Python, in HTML, and one of them are going to be is going to be unordered list, which is essentially a list that has only bullet points. There's no really order to them. You'll notice that the list element name is called UL. And the thing that we're going to use inside of them is this thing called LI, which stands for list items. So how do we actually code this? Well, inside of my body, I'm not going to do anything with the header just yet. I'm just going to go ahead and type in UL. And you'll see here in my visual code, it gives me a little information about it. It represents a list of items where the order of the items isn't important. So one thing that you could use unordered list for is like getting a bunch of recipe items. So if you have a blog that talks about getting recipe items, it doesn't really matter how you buy the items at the store or anything. What does matter is the prep part of your code. So why don't we try to go with this idea of recipe items? So if I go ahead and create this UL item here, and I open this guy up, we'll see that nothing really happens inside of my code. And some of us might be tempted to say, let's just say we're baking cake or something like that, eggs and flour and sugar. I'm not the most creative baker, so for the time being, though, you'll see that all we get is this eggs, flours, and sugar at the top. And so how do we actually create this to look like a list? What we need to do is make each of these guys list items. So that's where the LI concept comes into play, okay? So what we could do for that one, if I say LI eggs, see it here. I'm not going to do them for all of them just yet. Does everyone see how I get this type of bullet point? Oh, there's more though. I get this kind of bullet point that's popping up at the top up here. And if I go ahead and I do that a few times, And I'm going to put my flour and sugar in there. Let's see everyone. Okay. I refresh it. We'll see that I get eggs, flour, and sugar like that. Hey, Romaldo, welcome. We're doing a bit of list practice for chapter 4, and we kind of made a new file with it. So what I'll do is I'm going to toss it in the chat for you if you want to download it. And then this is being recorded too, but you didn't miss out too much just yet. So let me just put this in the chat for you. There we go. There's the HTML file list practice is what we're working on right here. And then practice styles.css is something we'll come back to later, but you can just download it for the time being. Okay. Cool. Does anyone have any questions with this list item that we made here? It's a very basic list, but you can see here we made a UL like so. We have list items inside of it. How's everyone feeling with this one? Is it straightforward? Well, list experts.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So what we could do next now, let's see here. You'll notice here as well, just to throw another wrench into the confusion for us, we can actually remove the end tag from these. So if you want to, I mean, if you're lazy or something, you can go ahead and actually remove these guys. You'll notice that it kind of puts it all the time. Oh, Putney, great question. Yes, so essentially, UL is the type of list that it's going to be, and the LI is the item of that list. So UL always comes before LI. There's a different version of this we'll see later, but essentially LI always needs to be within a UL or OL. So UL always comes before LI. Great question. Cool. And also, I was just saying you can remove the end tags, but I think for readability and just, it's easier to make a mistake if you're forgetting where tags are. Just keep the end tags in there, and that just makes it easier for us. Okay. Now, we'll also see that we have this bit of an indent property, which we could try to look at a bit as well. We'll see here the only element that's allowed inside of an UL or a unordered list element is an LI element. So you can't really have any plain text or another UL element immediately inside of it. But what we can try to do here is let's get a bit more complicated. What if I have inside of my, I have a few list items. What happens if I add another UL inside of this one? We'll see here that if I add another unordered list inside of my original unordered list, I get that kind of indent property there. Okay. So if you're making something where it's like, okay, I'm going to describe multiple parts of each of these references or items here, this is how you would do it there. Okay. Hi, Danathas, welcome. We're working on a bit of the chapter 4 list items. So in the chat, I'm going to throw in these two files we're working with, and then you could download them on SketchUp here. They're just so far we've just looked at the first few pages of chapter 4, and then that list practice is the file we're using right now. If you want to open it up for it, cool. So again, one more thing, let's kind of experiment a little bit. What happens if I immediately have a list item, an unordered list, and another one? You'll see here that it actually kind of puts us into the indent right away for us. Okay. You'll see that it keeps going in, and HTML has this built-in type of thing. Let me kind of undo all my work, where it has different types of bullet points based on the level of indentation that you're in. And what I mean by that is that testing is here. I keep indenting it. We'll see here, this guy's giving me a bit of a weird error. with that one. We'll see here that this guy doesn't have the indent as we thought. What happens if I put another UL inside of him? Oh, the reason why I'm not getting an indent there is because I forgot the list item. So let's do it this way. We'll see here that I kind of get a square bracket, and let's try one more level of this. Okay. We'll see here that I'm kind of, every time that I'm getting these, I'm adding a list item. You might have noticed earlier that I forgot to have a square black bracket there. If I delete this as a list item, it's not considered a list item, so it removes it from me. So you're going to want to have that list item there so that it makes sure that you have that bullet point. Okay. That's in general like what the bullet points do for us. So nothing major. But again, that's just kind of levels that you have. If this is something very complicated, don't worry. Usually with lists and unordered list items, getting the first level down is just as good. And maybe going into another level could be necessary. And the way that you could show it is essentially inside of where you want this indent to happen. You could do something like this, where after the word of sugar, I can make another unordered list underneath it, and then say like a bullet point there. Okay. So that's kind of with list items and the indenting with list items as well. And you'll see here that there's a few different ways that we can approach unordered lists with CSS as well. The default list symbol is going to be a bullet for all list symbols, but major browsers use bullet, circle, and square symbols. So you'll see here that different symbols kind of tell us the different things that are going on. And it's usually good practice to showcase different versions of what we could see here with CSS. So what we could do here is let's kind of experiment a little bit with how CSS works with this. Very similar to what we did earlier with our heading code. If I go ahead and I type in style like so, pull up this guy for me. If I have my style attribute, what I could say here, I could go ahead and try to change around my list item object. And what I could say, maybe we could do something. I'm just going to do color. What happens if I do maybe aqua? It kind of hurts my eyes. Sorry. Let me do light blue might be nicer. Okay. So light blue is a bit nicer, but you'll see here that I'm able to affect all the list item versions. Now, what happens if I change this into like a UL? We'll see here it's kind of the same concept where the UL is changed for me. Let me go ahead and change the color. So what I'll do is I'll make the UL have a different background color of light blue, and then the color of my list items can be maybe something like brown. Okay, cool. So that's essentially what's going on, and we could see here as well that like the padding and the area of our list item or of our list is this space here. So last chapter 3, there's a bit about padding and margins that we didn't cover in full, so I'm going to jump to that as well after we finish up these list items. But these are pretty similar to the elements you've seen. And again, as we saw yesterday, anything that's an element in HTML can have these styles applied to it. Now, based on what the book is telling us as well, for list items, there might be a specific styling that we could see here. So this is shorthand. A list style is shorthand for list style type. So these two refer to the same thing. And what we could say here is that there's going to be a ton of different versions of stylings that we could have. So this is Georgian numbering. So we could see here, it's kind of like an interesting style. It's a different version of what these are. But you can essentially say in the list item version, list style type. Maybe if you want square list objects only, you can do it that way. See here. There's lower Greek, so lower Greek letters, stuff like that. And these are all just different versions of numbering and organizing what it is. And you can see here that it's kind of the same for each of these ones. So if I go ahead and inside of my secondary list, I don't know what, like in my recipe thing, all I'm trying to show here is that if you apply to the individual list item the list style type, it's going to apply the same type for all of these. So where does this come into play? Well, this is probably where you might need to make classes or different things to work with. So again, we make classes that kind of congregate ideas together. Or similar objects together. So you might have a class for your outer level list and then have a class for your inner level list. And we could do that really quick if you just simply apply like class styles to it. So if I create a class called inner, I'll call the outer one outer list and the inner one inner list. What we could do now here is similar to what we did last week. So I'm going to say dot outer list has a list style of lower Greek, and you'll see that my outer list has this applied style to it, but my inner list doesn't. And now what you could do here is say dot inner list has a list style type. Let's use disk as a general idea. We can see we changed it that way. Good. So like again, if all this seems like a lot at once, all I'm doing is just applying a different class to each of these list items, and I'm just kind of experimenting what's going on. Again though, the unordered list items are all elements in HTML, so you can play around with them as much as you'd like, and you can really make it unique based on what you want to add there. Okay. So let's just kind of keep it default for the time being for the sake of simplicity. There we go. So this is all the default attributes of it. And again, as we can see here, based on the chapter, you can actually drag, copy, and paste. Putney, what I was doing up there was CSS. I got, if you need a bit of help inside of the head with CSS, I'll toss this code in for you. That's just the styling that we have. But again, I was just experimenting a bit to show you different ways to approach it there. Okay. General though, UL and LI we're working with. And the general idea with these descendant selectors too, and then I believe Sullivan, you had a question with this as well. CSS roles for element that's inside of another element, you can use a descendant selector. So this is actually another way that we can do this. So if you have two UL and UL, which means that there's an unordered list inside of another unordered list, you can essentially tell your HTML, the first guy, actually let me leave these here. So my first background color of the UL is light blue, and what I can type is something like this. So if I go ahead and I type out UL twice inside of my code, that tells me to look at an unordered list that's inside of another unordered list. Let me do like a light golden, or that's kind of a big one, like coral or something. We'll see here that if I do UL twice, what happens is that my background color then changes to have this different style on it. So what I did earlier was classes, where I said class 1, class 2. And again, you can also change the same concept by doing something like this. So ULLI, that tells us that for every line item that's inside of a UL, let's go ahead and change the color to orange. We'll see here that all these are orange now because all these are line items within a UL. But if I go ahead and I type out ULLI, so this is looking, so class might be easier to work with this as well. If this is getting a little like convoluted, that's fine. But essentially what's happening is that I'm looking at my first unordered list. I'm looking at my second unordered list. So this guy, and I'm saying for every list item that's inside of two unordered lists, go ahead and apply a certain style to it. Like light sea green or something like that. We'll see here that it's now changing this color to that color that's there. Okay. Go blue. Okay. So this one was kind of introduced to us kind of quickly because last week we didn't really cover it. Is anyone confused about how this double UL is working? How the ULI is working? Or is this making sense to folks? Any questions? Nope. Making sense? Great. Okay. Cool. So again, different ways of doing it. I You might be wondering, like, well, do I use a class or this way? Either one is fine. There's multiple ways to approach and fix these things with coding. So whichever way you're more comfortable with is fine. Again, if you're doing a lot of these though, sometimes it can get convoluted. But this same concept can apply to your classes and built-in IDs as well. Okay, cool. So that's a concept of descended selectors. That's what it means. So essentially, you're descending down this list of or group of items that you have, and then what we could try to look at here now are these nicer guys, which you might encounter as well, which are ordered lists. So what I'll do here is that very similar to ULs. If you type out instead of UL, OL, like so. Surprise, that stands for ordered list. So UL is unordered, OL is ordered, and essentially the exact same concept can apply for us. I'm going to say for my second list of items here, mixed items. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of do this recipe part. Something like this. So essentially, an OL, when you put it together, every list item in an OL is going to take a type of numerical value or some form of ordering that you have. So the default one is 1, 2, 3. And similar to this one, if you have a group of things that it doesn't matter which order you get them, that's an unordered list. If you need to have things in order, you need to have an ordered list. So you can't really just put all three of these things together in the even. You're going to need to mix them together. So there's steps that you need to do first. Only difference there is OL, and the exact same concept can occur with the styling. So the styling takes on the same idea, and the cool thing is that you'll notice that if I have an unordered list line item, I applied the color orange to it, and we'll see here that all my line items are brown. So the same idea here can work for ordered lists. If I type in ordered list line item, let's say like this color will be different, maybe goldenrod. We'll see now that I have different color style applied to each of these ones. Now, can you do an ordered list within it? Yep. So if I do OL, I don't really do like recipe things too much. So we'll see here that if I have an OL inside of my list item, I'll need to take another list item. What's happening here, everyone, is that if you're encountering this weird error where you have a list item, but there's like this regular text underneath it, you forgot to make your thing a list item inside of here. So make sure that those are list items for it. Now we'll see here, oops, that I now have this kind of indented level of 1. So it's 1, 1. And again, if I add a second list item to this one, we'll see here that does 1, 1, 2. So again, these are all just levels, and it's the exact same as the unordered list.
All right. So if I select like numbers instead of that of the squares,
yep,
will it be the same as the organized ordered list?
Sure. So if you are you saying like the different styles with the numbers?
Yeah, like instead of instead of using squares or bullet points as we selected, we used numbers. Wouldn't
Sure.
it be just the same as the organized list?
Yeah, so it's a good point. So what we could try to do here, let's actually try to see if we can take a look at the UL And the thing that
I'm
changed,
only asking that because I want to understand the difference really between the
yeah.
organized.
So these the main thing about them is that let's say so it's called list style. You'll see here that you have a different. If I apply a style of decimal to my unordered list, it will actually make it kind of like an ordered list for us. So I can have it 1, 2, 3, and 1 and 2. The main difference here is that an unordered list by default doesn't have the numerical stylings to it, whereas the ordered list does. So this is kind of the default styling of an ordered list, whereas an unordered list doesn't have that. Now, another interesting thing you could do, Solomon, is with the OL, my ordered list, I could change the type to circle, and I technically kind of reversed these roles. So my unordered list is numbered, and my ordered list is
I see.
circular. So again, with this one, like it doesn't matter really which one you pick. If you only want to use one style, what you could do is say UL list style type decimal. But later on in coursework with CSI and other ones, you'll take a look at how SEO and the websites and stuff look at your code. And if you are organizing your content with UL and OL, that's better for like Google and these parsers to see what type of content you have. So again, in general, though you can change it visually, these parsers that are built in like with SEO and like I think it's like 150 teaches it. You'll see that the parser might not like this because it's expecting unordered items here and then ordered items there. So in general, if you want to have things in a specific order, use an ordered list with LIs. If you want things in a general order without any really care, you can use an unordered list. But again, the cool thing about HTML and CSS is that you can change literally anything in your page based on these selectors. Okay, cool.
Got it.
Yeah, awesome. Nice. So before we jump into figures, that's kind of a little bit about these lists there. Is everyone feeling pretty good with lists? This makes sense to folks? Nice. Okay.
Just one more thing. When does the organized ordered list makes like a huge difference in terms of my code if I'm trying to retrieve information?
Yes. So right now, like with our coding on the back end here, it won't make a huge difference. It's easier if let's just say that we had a situation where we couldn't use ACSS. Then essentially this first part is just making sure that you get all the items. The second part is making sure that you follow a set routine. So if you like, because like when you're baking something, you can't not mix the items before putting it in the oven. So you have to follow that step. Whereas
Right.
with the general unordered list, it doesn't matter at the store if you buy the sugar or flour first. Like it doesn't matter. All that matters is you get all the ingredients.
Okay.
So that's kind of the difference there for them. Okay. Cool.
You're making more complicated than it is.
Oh no, no, that is good. That's a good question. It's again the thing is that some of this was made when we didn't have access to a lot of these stylings and stuff. So some of it sometimes like doesn't apply in modern. But again, it's just important to know these differences. Nice. So everyone, what we're going to look at next here is this figure idea, and a figure element is going to represent a unit of content with an optional caption is self-contained. So usually a figure is going to hold text or programming code, a picture, or a data table. Now, in one of the videos I showcased kind of using this image IMG source as well. So figure and image are kind of used side by side a lot. But the cool thing about a figure is that you can have this caption. So let's actually go ahead and see what we could do with this figure. See here. I'm going to go ahead and inside, let me put something on Google first really quick. I'm gonna grab an image of like a cake. If you have or maybe like an oven image. Okay. If you have an image that you want to use on your own end, you could just look one up. This is like a really basic one I'm going to use. I'm just going to grab this. What I'm going to do is we'll notice, oh, that's a web file. Let me pull one more thing here. Okay. So one thing, folks, for your assignments and in general how code runs, I mentioned this last week, but if you're working with images or files and you're calling them in your code, you'll need to have the image file in the same location as where your code is. If you don't have it in the same location, you'll need to tell your code to look for it somewhere. But to make it really easy for us right now, if I'm working with a cake image, I'm going to keep it in the same directory, the same folder as my list practice, or just whatever file I'll call this one practice. Okay. So this is just a very general image of a cake that I can try to add to my file here. I'll upload that into the Zoom call. There, if you want to go ahead and pick it up. And let's see here. Why don't we try to kind of use the code that's given to us in the PowerPoint using this figure concept. So let me see here. This guy. Cool. So we'll have a bit of a picture and everything as well. And what I'll do here is I'm going to type out figure. And figure, again, is an element that represents flow of content, optionally with a caption that is self-contained. So for the time being, let's just make a figure, end it, start and end element. And inside of a figure product, let's see here, or element, we'll see nothing really changes on my website. What we could try to add here is this fig caption, which is an element for just a general caption of it or something to do with our code. So we could say here, I'm going to say this is an example cake image, something like this. We'll see here that this goes ahead and just kind of puts it in normally within our figure. And what we could do next here is try to add in this image element. So if you want to go ahead and use a figure and use an image with it, what you could say here is add in this img, and img is this thing that represents the image. Now, an image element has this source attribute, and that specifies where our image is. So if you're using the image I provided for us, what you'd actually type in, and you might have noticed that my Visual Studio kind of already does it. It knows that cake.jpg is inside of there. So I can go ahead and just close this off like so. So right now I have my figure, I have a figure caption, and I have this image of source. We'll see here now that I kind of got this figure and then this kind of caption underneath it. Okay. Now, you'll see here that for every image with HTML5 as well, you can provide this alternative thing. And what alt does, I'm going to say this should be a pick. What alt does is that if something is missing in your code or something is wrong, it will actually run this alt code. And what I mean by that is let's go ahead and delete. Let me pull this back up. Inside of my material, let's just say that I didn't have the cake inside of there. We'll see here that you might have seen this error before. It's this type of like blank thing, and it said this should be a pick. And now, oops, I think it's in my directory somewhere. If I bring it back, you'll see that it's working. So alt essentially just specifies if you're missing something or something is wrong with your code, it will run that one. Okay. So again, I focus on this a bit because your project 2 and your capstone part 2 talks a bit about the images. So this is one way to take a look at it as well. And we'll see here that this is just a general layout of how this code will look for us. So again, we have figure. If you're making an image, it's going to contain a few parts. You're going to say create a figure element. Try to describe where my image is coming from, the alt tag of it, and then the caption of it as well. Okay. Now, one more thing I want to showcase to us is that this is like a massive image that works with it. So what you could do here is inside of my styling up here, I can just go ahead and overwrite my styling of image. You could go ahead and use the size. I'm going to say 50 pixels here. Oops, here. Let's try 50%. Oh, looks like that guy's not changing. But in general, let's just try to change around the margins as well. So you can go ahead and try to shift the margins. Here. We'll see here that we have more space on the left side getting kind of shifted over there. Here. And another thing that you could do here is specify, let's go width. There we go. So you could specify to this guy the kind of width and the height that it will take up. So why don't we try to do a width of 500 pixels? And if you'll notice here, if once I added that width, it kind of shifted the pixels to be something else. And my height shifts that as well. If we make it very obviously small, so I'll change the width and height of my image. We'll see here now that I have a very small image working. Okay, so that's just the two things. You actually don't even need this margin left. Just kind of experimenting with that one. Okay, we'll see that my image shifts back there. Now, without getting too much into details of width and height and pixels and percentages, the image that you download has a certain amount of pixels in it. So if I go and tell it to have 1920 pixels as a width, you'll notice that it's kind of, it doesn't look the best. You might have seen these. These are kind of overstretched images. So what happens here is that essentially is you're trying to take a look at an image, but you're forcing it to give you more pixels than it originally had, so it's going to look kind of bad. So what happens there is that just make sure that you could type in, I'll show say if you want how to look for specific pixel sizes or whatever, but in general, like using, I think like 250 and 250 pixels for like a smaller image is okay, right? And because again, if this is an element in HTML, we reset it normally, it can get applied all these other items to it. So what you could say as well is align item center. Let's see here actually. Is it line self? I guess not working. Let's actually try to see if we can align the figure itself. So instead of just overwriting image, I'm going to overwrite figure. That guy's not working either. Should be center. Would it be align items? This guy's not responding to me. Okay. Well, in general, you can also apply the alignment rules to it as well. If the aligning isn't working out to you, you can kind of manually shift it. As I said earlier, I'm just going to say margin left. And I'll say like 100 pixels, like so. And then that will push them over. And if I change this to like 500 pixels, we'll see I push them over a lot more. So that's what the margin left does for us. Okay. So this is again just a figure and the captions, nothing major. Image, the figure doesn't give you the image, but the image element does. And again, I'll toss that into our chat here if you wanted to have that snippet of code, just for reference. Okay. Okay.
ALT stand for again?
Oh, sorry. What was that?
What does the ALT right at the figure down there? If you scroll down.
ALT. This one.
to change, alter, or
Oh, good. Are you asking like what alt does for us?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What does it do?
So alt is kind of required in image. I mean, so essentially what alt does is that if you encounter a scenario where something doesn't load for us, so right now my cake image is loading okay. Let's just say that you have a server error and cake is deleted from your image or from your database. What will replace it is that image of alt. So you might have seen
Ah,
that
that's
broken
how.
image. Yeah, you might have seen that one
I,
before, right? That
I
broken one.
hate that.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? It's a bad sign usually. So again, alt is essentially something that says load image source cake. If it's not there, use the alt. That's what the alt does. Cool. Okay. And so the remainder of the chapter here is talking a bit about organizational elements, and let's see here. The general ideas there that I want to showcase for the projects were with those images and figures. But again, as a reminder, let me toss this into chat for us again. There's a bunch of different elements, and I won't go through all of them because you'll be bored to death with it. But essentially, there's general phrasing and sectioning. And you can see here that for each of these ones, you can kind of look up what the element is. And there's a huge section in W-Tree that tells you what each of the elements do with examples of it. Okay, cool. One more thing that I kind of wanted to showcase to us as well that is useful for the links and everything like that are, let me see here, is the href one. So you might have seen something before with href, and you'll see here that it does the # dining. So let's actually kind of explore with this one. So you might have seen in this example that inside of this HTML file, there's two guys at the top called dining and clothing. I believe with Project Tree, it's asking something similar to this. So let's try to kind of make this happen in our code. So what I'm going to do here is try to organize my two sections of my recipe to work with these elements. And essentially, you might have seen these on websites. If you click dining, it will jump you to the dining. If you click clothing, it will jump you to the clothing. So this is how the navigation works for us, and how you can make it happen where, excuse me, each of these guys organizes your page a bit differently. So to get started here, what I'll do is at the very top of my body, I'll go ahead and type out this thing called NAV or nav. And what nav does is represent the section of your page that has only navigation elements inside of it. Okay. And what I could say now is I'm going to create this element called A. A essentially is this thing that's dedicated to having links to other things. That's what A does. We haven't used it all the time, but it represents a link. So you can link it to a website or to something else as well. Before I add in my dining here, I'm going to go ahead and put ingredients. Actually, let's see here. Let's do something like this, items get. Okay. Oh, and let me get back my cake image. This. And we'll see here that at the very top of my code, I now get that items to get. Okay. And if I type in another one, how to cook the items, you'll see here that I can't get the spacing between them. So what I want to do is try to shift it. So how do I get it to be kind of like with this underscore dining and clothing? This is where the href comes into play. So what the href will do will tell the A to link to something. And let's just say that if I want to make sure that this works out really well, what we could say here is use this concept of a div. And again, you might do this in different ways. That's totally fine. How about instead of doing it as a div for time being, let's just apply an ID to this one. So I'll say ID to my UL, and again, ID is this unique identifier. And what I'll call this here is, I should really solve this. I'll call this one ingredients. So the ID of this section is my ingredients, and then the ID of my, let's just go with this ID one. If I'm working with IDs immediately in my HTML code, what I could do is inside of my A, I can add this unique attribute called href, and I'm going to link it to ingredients. And you'll see here when I hover over ingredients, I can actually control click there. Oops. And it's not working just yet because it doesn't jump down to there. But one thing that we remembered with IDs is that when we did our styling, the dot was for classes, if we remember, and the pound sign was that special one for IDs. So if I want to reference an ID, what I could do here is put in a pound sign and the ID name. Okay. Now, all I did here was I essentially said, I'm going to call this ingredients. Say how to bake a cake and make this a bit more like noticeable. And some of us might have already noticed that at the very top up here, I have this as a blue one. And you'll see that it's making, it's jumping me down, or essentially what's happening is that it's putting me into the location of this pound sign. Okay. Cool. And awesome. What we can do here, try to do something similar with the other one as well. Let's see what's going on here. All right. And let's actually, if I make this really small. Yep. So it's kind of hard to see because we don't have the full screen just yet. But if people see here, let me make this a bit smaller. If I click ingredients to get now, it jumps me down my page to the section that's titled pound ingredients. Okay. So a href essentially tells your code to say, go ahead and jump when the user clicks on this A section, jump to wherever this is. And where is this ID located? Right here. Okay. So the ID can be anything. And this is useful for your projects as well, because at the top, it asks you to say like description 1, description 2. And if I want to go ahead and also jump to the baking section, what I could say here is a new href. And let's just say that down here, the mix items is where my baking occurs. I can actually experiment a bit. I'm going to put my ID instead of on the OL. I'm going to put it on this list item element. And the ID of my mix items is going to be called baking. If I want to reference this ID, what I can say at the top is href is equal to # baking. Okay. And again, some of us might not have seen A before. It's a newer one. If you're ever using an A, it's to use a href. That's the only reason that we use A's, is to start linking things. Okay, so if I run this guy one more time, we'll notice that my how to bake a cake is underscored. And when I click on it, it jumps me down the page into the mix items section. And if I click on this one, it jumps me down the page to eggs. This one down here. Okay. And I can do this for as many times as I want, right? Question?
Is it the same idea if you want to send to a different page?
Yes, awesome. So if let's just say that we have different HTML files into one page, you can actually use the hrefs for that as well. Actually, you know what? That's a good. Practice. So I believe that the project tree will ask us for this. Let's see if we can do it this way. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and quickly, I'll provide this code for us inside of the chat. So don't worry too much about typing all this at once here. Let me just say something like this one. One. Okay, so what I did here, folks, is I just created a new HTML page. It's very basic. It's called extra page. That's all it does for us. So I'm going to toss this in the chat for us. Now, Sullivan asks, how do I, will this link to a new page as well? Because right now it's easy to jump down to the new guys. That's the IDs, but sometimes you want to have interactive multiple pages to work with. So what we could do here is if I open up my code again, inside of my href in my nav menu, and again, nav is just for navigation items. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to add these two things in between it. If you press shift and backslash, that's what adds them. This just makes it look a bit neater. Something like this. So if I run my code again, we'll see I get the three guys, but if I click on this one, nothing happens. So my href here, right now I have a new extra page HTML, but I don't really have any code for it in here. So how do I get to the idea of it? Well, what we could try to do here, see here, is attempt to type out the actual HTML page of it. So what we could say here is extra page.html. And in my VS Code, if I click on this, it'll actually take me to where that's located. And if I go ahead and refresh this, we'll see I now jump to a new HTML page. Okay.
All right, but for that to happen, both files needs to be in the same folder.
Awesome, right? So let's actually experiment a little bit more with that one. Like so. So now I went ahead and I moved my file to a new folder. It's not inside of the same directory as my list practice. File not found error, it's not there. How do I fix it? I need to go ahead and in my code, I actually need to add the file location of it. So I could say something like layer slash HTML page. Where am I getting layer from? That's the name of the file that I made. If you call this dir, something like that, dir, VS Code has a nice way of doing this where I could say in Visual Studio Code will actually list out your things. So right now it says dir, so I could say dir and list out every item inside of my directory. So dir slash extra page.html. Do this here.
You type dir just to be shorter to find.
Dir to be shorter. But let's just whatever name that you create your folder is the one that you have to reference here.
And it would pop out. Would suggest as it just.
Yeah, your VS Code will suggest it for you. So again, if I delete this href, you'll see here when I add in my href in these two strings, it will automatically tell me what that directory is.
But again, if I want to direct that to a HTML file that is in a different directory from where your code is, where your web page is.
Yes, that's what you would need to do. So you would need to also, and let's just say that this isn't even in the same subdirectory. If it's on my desktop, then you would need to do like desktop / folder, stuff like that. So you need to get the exact
entire origin bit, and it starts from desktop.
It starts from desktop, yeah.
Okay.
So one more thing too is that let's just say like this one, right? So this is like a website called Site Wizard. What we could also say here is in my href, link to an actual URL, like so. This one in. And you'll see here that it says go to a website. And when I click on it, it will take me directly to the URL that I provided. So that's essentially how linking works. And if you have a web page with like 4 or 5 different pages, if you have a web page with pages you made, you'll use this version. If you have built-in HTML with IDs, this is to jump you down the page. If you ever go to websites and it has like a scrolling effect, like if you click on a thing and it like kind of does a cool scroll, that's what this is doing. This one takes you to a new page, and then this one takes you to a new website there. Okay. Cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's it's like
We can do a lot of stuff already with just these. Lot of
yeah.
stuff.
And that's and in general, the main idea with this course too is to teach you the fundamentals of how to get started with them, because there's a lot of different versions and like there's different ways that you can approach doing this. But I guess you've seen here, you can even change the color of the links, of the style of the links as well. You can make the links bigger because those are elements, right? So you can get really diverse and like get very specific with what you want to do. Okay. So folks, with this one, what I'll do here, we didn't use the practice style sheets, but let me make this all into, and I'll add this onto the page. Blank. Oh, awesome. Yeah, let's actually try that out really quick. Sorry for the bad. Something with this one. We have this href, but you can also do a target, and a target is similar a bit to href, but target can also help us where to display it. And as Felipe said, if I go ahead and add, actually, I can do it this way. Let me run this guy one more time. So right now, if I click go to a new page, it will take me to a new one like so. But if folks don't want to have it open immediately, what you can add after, let's do it this one here. I could say target is equal to underscore blank. Yep. And now when I hit go to a new page, instead of overloading where I am now, it opens it up in a new tab for me. Okay. It's the same. This target blank actually works for all of these. So if you don't want the user to have to scroll down the page, oh, that one might not. Let's actually see here. I guess it won't work for the IDs one. But if you don't want the user to have it replaced, you could do it that way. Oh, did I not? There we go. Cool. Nice. The how to bake a cake works as well. So again, what's happening here is that if I add target to any of my hrefs, when I open it up, it opens to a new page or it jumps me down like that. Okay. Cool. So I don't I don't want to bore people too much with all these like hrefs and A's, but these are different ways to approach it. And let's see here. The rest of these sections are essentially more displays and elements. I'll leave you guys if you want to read through these, because I don't want to just like go through all of them back to back. The main one I wanted to showcase was this href and this ID. And again, an ID is an attribute, so an ID can be applied to anything. So an ID can be applied to ingredients or to this item. It could be applied to an OL, so it doesn't really matter. Okay. And one more thing, I just wanted to, because we didn't cover it in full last time. Let me see here. There's one like slide that I just wanted to double check. Values. Okay. So very briefly in chapter 3, this kind of covers it as well. But there's a few things with borders. So essentially that you can surround your elements with borders. What that means is that if I do inside of my styling, if I have my image, I could do something like border style ridge. I don't know what ridge does. Let's make this full screen. Cool. We'll see here. My image doesn't look the best. Let me make it like 200 pixels. This one. Okay. We'll see here that I get a kind of bordered around it. You can also change the is it weight or width? You could change essentially a bunch of different properties with the border as well, if you wanted to surround something with the border. So width, style, and color. There's not an exhaustive list with these. Let's do border width of like 50 pixels. That can be a pixels item. And we'll see now that I have this kind of cool looking canvas image popping out at my screen with this one. This is just border styles, essentially. So if you're asked to add a border to your image, you can do it that way. And again, I'm making this specific to my image of my page. But you can do it with anything. I think another one is dash instead of ridged. That looks weird. It's like, that's a cool little thing you could do as well. Now that looks more like a dotted border around it. Okay, cool. And I wanted... That's border. Here, this is what I wanted to show us because a few folks had a few questions with pixels and REM. So on chapter 3, we have this ideas of pixels, and essentially a pixel like is a small pixel on your actual monitor. So your monitor is made up of a ton of pixels, whichever screen you're looking at, and so is your phone and everything too. So when we say pixels, we're actually telling our code to use a specific amount of them. And the general idea is that, let's see here, ideal pixel to be 1/96 of an inch for desktop computers and 1/150th of an inch for mobile. So we don't need to worry about getting hyper specific about these, but in general, when we say stuff like pixels, px, that's telling me take up 250 pixels height wise. This one thing, take 300 pixels up to the screen lengthwise. You can see here that when I use pixels, my image isn't actually responsive. We'll see it doesn't kind of shift with things. If I change this width to be percent, we'll see here that it's a bit stretched out. But when I scroll out this way, we might see that my image is getting weirdly stretched out even more. So this is taking up a constant 300% of my screen, and that's where the differences are. So you can see here the main difference between pixels and height here is that this is always 300 pixels. It's set to be like that. If I put it at percent, it's set to be at 300% regardless, based on my screen size. And the screen size is what my URL or my desktop's taking up, not my actual monitor right now. Okay, cool. And again, there's another one. I think we saw it as 30 REM was another one that we saw. 30 REM makes it out a bit more. And it also doesn't have the effect. Let me change this one to 25 REM as well. We'll see here that this is kind of like a nicer version of pixels that goes ahead and kind of sets it in place, but it looks a bit neater there. Okay. There's some more properties with borders that we don't need to worry too much about. One more thing here is that, as we said earlier, all these are elements, and all elements have a default like width, padding, and margin properties that you can adjust. So again, the margin is essentially the level between these two items. There's going to be margin and padding. And again, a margin I'll show us here. If I look at my line items, I could say margin is equal to 5 pixels. And what that gives us is saying for every line item in my code, put 5 pixels of margin spacing completely around it. What you can also say is for padding, you could do 10 pixels. Now I have padding all around each of my items, so that makes them more spread out. You could be very specific about this, where you could say padding top is equal to 10 pixels, and you'll see here that that only puts padding at the top of each of my items. Okay, so again, with the pixels and percentages, you can also do percentage for numerical ones. That's very large, so maybe it's not the best. Maybe 1% padding top is good. That looks better. But all of these are good to go for you guys to use, okay? So feel free. Let me add a comment really quick here if I remember. Cool. Feel free to use like percent. I guess that one's not really working. Feel free to use like percent, pixel, EM, REM, all of those work okay for us. And the way that you get used to them is just by experimenting with them a bit. Okay. Cool. So let me